There's a quality of our being that shines through our attention that we could say is our inner light. And it might not look like the kind of light that we see, emanating from a lamp or the sun or something that our mind's image would come up with when we say the word light. But it is a type of light of consciousness that is shining through really our whole being and many centers of our being, our heart, our soul, our energy body, our chakras. I mean, so many aspects of who and what we are. But it also definitely shines through the light of our attention. When it expresses in a way that light is really perfumed with the essence of what we are, there tends to be a real quality of stillness to it. And that stillness is a really powerful thing because it has a transmission. And in a world that's more chaotic, how I would put it is that the chaotic patterns really feel the presence of that stillness when it's potent. And they can entrain to that stillness in a way that settles them and slows them down.
Welcome back to the Sounds of Sand podcast. My name is Michael Riley. I want to thank you all for the wonderful feedback on our most recent episodes. We've had some great episodes with other spiritual teachers, like today's guest, Mukti. Episodes with Mirabai Starr, Kabir Helminski, Ellen Emmett, Gail Brenner, and also scientists like Neil Thies and Monica Gagliano. So we invite you to check out our archive of episodes at scienceandnonduality.com/podcast. And our episodes are now on YouTube, so you can go listen over there and connect with us. And of course on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, we invite you to leave a good 5-star review, which helps spread the word and the mission of Sand through this podcast. So today on the show, I'm delighted to be in conversation with spiritual teacher Mukti. And Mukti's name originates from the Sanskrit, which is most often translated as liberation, a term used in Vedanta and Buddhism, much in the same way as the word salvation is used in Christianity. Mukti has been an associate teacher of the Open Gate Sangha since 2004 and has been a student of her husband Adyashanti, who's also a beloved presenter and teacher in the Sand community, when he began teaching in 1996 when they founded Open Gate Sangha together. And we have a wide-ranging and beautiful discussion today about many topics, including spiritual bypassing in the shadow, the sacredness of attention, the importance of spiritual community, the spiritual path and paradox, the shared field of awareness, holographic being, the importance of fundamentals and practice, and the energetics of awakening, which is a new series that Mukti is offering through the Open Gate Sangha. And you can find out more about this series happening in June 2023 in our show notes or on the Open Gate Sangha website. And now, without further ado, I bring you Mukti on the Sounds of Sand podcast presented by Science and Nonduality.
Welcome to Science and Nonduality. What is non-duality?
The universal forces.
It's the collective consciousness.
Being aware.
Trauma is not the external event that happens. Trauma is the impact of that event, which is the disconnection from ourselves.
That matter is energy. Energy is matter. That's what EMC squared is about.
There's a language without nouns. There is a language without subjugation. There's a language without objectifying.
But if it's recorded, then there is a collapse. But if it's not, then it's the infinite potentiality.
Okay, I'm here with Mukti. Thank you so much for being on the Sounds of Sand podcast. It's wonderful to reconnect with you again in the Sand community.
Great to be here, Michael, and to be here with all the listeners.
So to begin, I just wanted to ask, what's present for you right now in your teaching and where you are with the Sangha and your work in general?
That's a great question. It's always good to feel the edge and, leaning in keep leaning in. Well, coming up pretty soon, I'm going to be presenting a series of talks this June, 4 Thursday evenings on the energetics of awakening. So in my being, I've been really looking at all that I've been sort of banking in my knowledge over the last couple decades of my own unfolding, but also, much of what I've been taking note of as I work with people in counseling and my teachings. And so it's taken me a number of years to get to this point where I feel ready to really tackle that topic, because it's truly a vast topic, and I'm sure I'll only touch into just a fraction of it. And I probably only know a tiny fraction of this vast topic, but I do know and have come to know a lot about it. So I'm really excited to see just how it's going to land in terms of how I'll structure it and how it'll be received. And I think that there's so many different aspects to the energetics of awakening, whether it's a Kundalini unfolding or transmission or Shakti or just your garden variety energy that might shift as maybe more influx of energy comes through your system and the body acclimates. And there's just so much to look at there. And of course, there's all of the energetics that come into play in ways that people tend to awaken, where a lot of the opposites, find a perfect blend as people are, grounded and resting down and in, but also, taking their stand or their seat and really presenting out to the world. And so there's that balance of in and out and gathered and expanded, receptive, active, all of those opposites, and just how we can come to know them better through all kinds of things, posture, practices, states of consciousness.
Yeah, I can imagine there's such a wide dynamic of energy that you can experience in individual and collective awakening. So it sounds like a huge topic.
It is.
Yeah. And stuckness too, I guess, like expectation that an awakening should have this, constant blossoming, but, dealing with those times when the energy is stuck and it's just not going anywhere and you feel like you're in a rut.
Right. Yeah. When it's stuck or contracted or, maybe sort of turning inward or, there's so many different aspects to it. I'm really grateful for the time I spent studying Chinese medicine and a lot of the patterns that energy can take or the energetic patterns of different emotions or states of mind or states of being, because it really helps me to find a languaging that people can step into, kind of model of how to perceive energy in a way that we can communicate about it.
You mean like the 5 elements in Chinese medicine, that paradigm?
Sometimes I talk about that, but I try to keep it even a little simpler. Maybe it's just something as simple as, like you were talking about stuck energy, and sometimes stuck energy will start to kind of turn more inward and a person will become more depressed or despondent, or it'll start to kind of turn outward and, it'll be stuck and they might feel kind of irritable or frustrated and then, angry, upset, rageful. So there's like different ways that stuck energy can turn. There's ways that energy becomes more stuck if we're more exhausted, because it's kind of like if you think of our energy like a flowing river or something, if there's not much of it, it chugs along and kind of starts to get stuck and coagulated. But if you gain energy, then the water start to move again. And, so it's sometimes really helpful to just be conscious of some of those basics and that can help steward our energy and also give us guidance as to where to put our attention to cultivate what we need to feel more replete and full.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did see too that you offer qigong on your website. So is the energy of the body is a huge part of this too? Because I think maybe a lot of times people think of meditation or contemplative practice as just happening from the neck up. So is that part of your work as well?
It is, yeah. I'm not like a qigong master or anything, but I do share some basic routines and exercises that I think are helpful, and invite people to study the whole model of qigong, in deeper ways should they become interested. But I do think the body is so intimately connected with all this, not only as an instrument that can help guide our awareness to certain states that are often more revolutionary or transformative when our systems come into balance. But also the body can kind of be a diagnostic. Like we can sense like when things are off or they don't resonate or hit the mark. And so it's really, the body can be both something that can diagnose, but also treat, because we can then correct our posture, correct our energetics, and it'll completely change our state of consciousness.
So speaking about stuck energy and this flow of dynamics that can happen in awakening, one thing that we've been talking about a lot on this podcast and at Sand is the role of shadow in spiritual work. So I'm just curious, in your role as a teacher and leader of the Open Gate Sangha, are you holding space for the shadow? Do you see that as an important theme in the work of the Sangha?
Well, I'm not entirely familiar with how you're using the term and shadow. Certainly in my work, I invite the human experience, and the rawness of it, and the grittiness. And in myself, probably more than Adya, I do work a lot with people with respect to different emotions that they're experiencing. That's all part of the gamut of the human experience, and how our nature as spirit and that gaze of eternity and that stillness, silence, spaciousness can really support our emotions that are difficult emotions or repressed or denied emotions to reharmonize and repattern into a greater integration with a sense of wholeness of being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. The word shadow is kind of another one of these big ambiguous terms, but I guess I was thinking specifically about spiritual bypassing. So the idea of kind of skipping over the dark, difficult grit that you were talking about and just kind of moving into the language of transcendence, the language of absolute spirituality.
Yeah, that's something that I think I can't really speak for. Oh, I guess I can. I mean, speak for Adya, but because he and I talk about, that it's just so important to have foundations in things like meditation and engaging in the world and being like a highly functional, human being that isn't just escaping into the transcendent. And gosh, for almost 3 decades now, we've really emphasized meditation retreats and lots of practice that ground people in the body, and hopefully make for very integrated people. So that's our interest and what our aim has been. And Adya's roots have been in Zen, which is a tremendous tradition as far as really having a sense of the expression of awakening be such a dominant part of the tradition. It's not just about having a realization, but how does it express in life, in activity, and so that's certainly something that's incredibly important at Open Gate.
Right. So it's not so much about the individual states of awakening, but how does that manifest in your relationships with other people and the daily grind, I guess you could say.
It's about the relationships to some extent, but it's about the movement of consciousness, and how it takes up residence in the human form and expresses through us. And we're constantly in relationship, whether it's with the cup of tea we're drinking or the, ground we're walking on or the person we're with. But I wouldn't say necessarily that our emphasis is on relationships per se. It's more on the practice and and in my case, especially like just the integration of that with the body. So I focus more on things like body meditations and being present with whatever arises, really. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, I didn't mean to say that there's an emphasis on relationship. I was saying more that, let's say, a de-emphasis on really specific transcendent states. Like, so someone might have this, Shakti rush through the body, or this Kundalini awakening for just a few minutes during a meditation. But if they're not able to kind of integrate that into their lives, it maybe loses its impact.
I think that some people do kind of seek a certain, highs or hits. And I've even known some people that just kind of make a lifestyle of just going around, shopping around for, the next event, the next teacher, the next great experience. And I feel that to really ground oneself in an evolving consciousness, it's just really important to, instead of digging 100 holes a foot deep, to really just dig one 100 feet deep type thing. And I think that that's often supported through developing a foundational practice, like meditation.
And you use the word evolving, and so I was also curious about how your teaching has evolved, and if you feel like, especially in the last few years, where we've seen a really rapid societal changes, environmental collapse, the pandemic, but things like social media and artificial intelligence. Have you noticed your own teaching evolving in the last few years?
Ironically, I sometimes feel like it's returning more and more to basics, and just reminding people of really foundational things that are more accessible. Because as the complexity of the outer world grows, I think it's great for people to have just very solid basics, and really to get a sense of what it is to return to the perspective of, what they've called in Zen beginner's mind. Just having that fresh view of the moment that is a time to really put down all the complexities and return to a sense of being that has its own organic rhythms and intelligence that really is patterned very differently than a lot of the complexities and sometimes chaos and division that's been arising in the collective. So I guess, in some ways we could say that the most evolved is often the simplest, you know. When I was in acupuncture school studying Chinese medicine, probably the most revered teacher who would sometimes come to our school as a guest speaker or guest practitioner, and I'm sure I'll pronounce her Chinese name wrong, but something to the effect of Shi Hua Li. She was in her 80s at the time when I was in school, and she always encouraged us to come up with a treatment plan for a patient that used one needle. And so just to really learn a discipline so well that you know how to bring the essence of it into like one instrument or one focus of attention. And it felt like, wow, you know, the most advanced person has a depth that can return to one simple thing. Yeah. And so probably instead of evolving in a way that might seem new or more, I don't even know, like more complex, it's a kind of evolving back to simplicity, I guess.
Yeah, and this attention actually was something else I was going to ask about, because you could say that with social media specifically and our smartphones and things like that, our attention is basically under attack. You know, so these companies want us to be distracted and quickly jumping from YouTube video to YouTube video, or, you know, phone alerts, etc. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how sacred our attention is in spiritual practice, and why it's perhaps important for people to develop these states of grounded attention that you're speaking about.
I love that question because there's so much being said in it. There's a quality of our being that shines through our attention that we could say is our inner light. And it might not look like the kind of light that we see, you know, emanating from a lamp or the sun or something that our mind's image would come up with when we say the word light. But it is a type of light of consciousness that is shining through really our whole being and many centers of our being, you know, our heart, our soul, our energy body, our chakras. I mean, so many aspects of who and what we are. But it also definitely shines through the light of our attention. And when it expresses in a way that light is really perfumed with the essence of what we are, there tends to be a real quality of stillness to it. And that stillness is a really powerful thing because it has a transmission. And in a world that's more chaotic, it functions, as I would put it, this is, you know, kind of the Mukti speak of how I view things. How I would put it is that the chaotic patterns really feel the presence of that stillness when it's potent, and they can entrain to that stillness in a way that settles them and slows them down, and, you know, brings them a expression that we associate with peace and order and harmony. And so when that attention is really being pumped out in ways that makes it more skittish, and people who are sensitive, they can really feel the movements of their brain and their mind, being very tousled by the electronics and whatnot. It does make it a little bit more difficult to express that more still attention. I mean, it's not exactly true, because the part that notices the movement in mind is by its nature very still. But in order to give that awareness that is, by contrast, much more still, a home in our person and an integration with our body systems and our attention that you're talking about, it is helpful to have a lot of breaks from the electronics, just to reset and allow that, what we might call still light of attention, to really still our minds. And that's so powerful, because, a still mind is far less judgmental. It's far more capable of stopping and listening and being attentive, and as you used a phrase earlier, holding space. So, yeah, I think you've brought up a really great inquiry question. That's the kind of question that all of us in this modern age can return to, on a regular basis. Yeah.
Yeah, I love. Well, there's two words that you use that I really love there, and one is home, and the other is this metaphor of light, because I think many people are finding their devices almost to be like a home base. Like, okay, this is where everyone communicates with me. This is how I interact with the world. This is where, my music is, and my emails and pictures and everything. So it's like to
information.
Yeah, information. So to kind of come back one level deeper to an actual home, which is that awareness, that light you were talking about. And also that using the metaphor of light is also a bit, I guess, subversive. I don't know if that's the right word, but because, what I'm talking about is digital light coming into our eyes, but it's just like, no, you have your own light inside of you that's even more powerful than any technology device. So.
Yeah. And it's maybe it's an invitation to let the pathways clear so that can move out instead of so much incoming.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say I'm, a person who does, use my phone a lot, and I have a lot of roles in this world, and I'm very active person in terms of just, all the things that I accomplish in a day, or or get accomplished through me, maybe more accurately. And I'm really grateful that I have the kind of mind and skill set to be able to, work for the administration and Open Gate Sangha, or for help facilitate things in my life and the life of our household. But it is a kind of continuing question, an inquiry in me, where I have to stop and think, okay, I think I'm feeling that I need to take a break, or it's an awareness practice in and of itself, the relationship with devices, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Tristan Harris.
I'm not, no.
Yeah, his group is called the Center for Humane Technology, and I think he used to work at Google. He was like a former Google, but he uses this. He talks about this, that our devices. There's thousands of engineers and psychologists and people all working against you to get your attention. So it's like you really have to work. You have to do the work personally to be able to put the device down, because you're going against all of these engineers and people who are all they really want is your attention, so they can show you ads, basically. So
Right.
it's not. It seems like it's just you versus your phone, but it's you versus your phone with a team of probably some of the smartest people on the planet, trying to take this attention from you.
I think that reminds me of something that's dear, which is the importance of spiritual community and friendships. And I think that for myself, what makes it easier not to be on the phone is actually making sure that my life has in its schedule, things that are relational, whether it's time in nature or walking with friends or, and because I think that I do talk to a lot of people who feel addicted to their devices. And by and large, what I've noticed is it's the people that put placeholders in their schedule and in their day where they really just incorporate lots of other activities that are not centered around devices that help them feel so much more balance and give them other types of gratification in those activities than the kind of gratification you get from being on your phone or the opioid releases or those kinds of things. But we have so many other layers of our chemistry and our, who knows what it is, pheromones and hormones and everything's that's syncing up when we spend time with others or spend time in nature or athletics or creativity or things like that I think kind of help counterbalance all of those more addictive poles.
Yeah, lovely. That's a great advice, and just emphasizes the importance of Sangha that you were talking about that. Yeah.
So we got the team of engineers, and they might be in our Sangha too, but we also have this whole host of like-minded human beings who genuinely have a true interest in exploring the inner depths of our essential nature.
Yeah.
And that's I like to think of that number of people as many as well.
Yeah. As a Kalyana Mita, I think that's the Pali word for like noble spiritual friends.
Wonderful. Yeah. I remember a teacher from, I think, the 80s, Suzanne Segal. She used to call them buddies in the vastness.
That's cool. Great.
I just often say kindred spirits,
Yeah. Buddies in the Vastness. That sounds like a great band name.
Doesn't it?
And another thing I wanted to ask you about, I think you touched on this earlier in our conversation, is about paradox. And what seems like our society's inability to rest in paradox. You mentioned division. That's a big theme, I think, in our modern society is divisions along political and economic and all these different spectra. Yeah. And there's a quote on your website I wanted to read about paradox and see if you could further continue this line of thought. But it says, Mukti speaks to paradoxes of spiritual unfolding, knowing and unknowing, disillusion and inclusion, the transcendence and the immanent, human and divine, and speaks to the spiritual journey as one of an unfolding discovery and expression.
Yeah, wow, that says a lot all in one thing. Is there a particular aspect of it, Michael, that interests you that you'd like me to elaborate on?
Yeah, I think, well, just in general, this idea of holding paradoxes in our spiritual practice. So not rushing to conclusions or being okay when it seems like two contradictory things are present.
Yeah. Well, I want to mention something that I'm not super well versed in, but just to give this part of our conversation a springboard. I believe that Ken Wilber talks about different capacities of the human being, and at a certain level, a person's able to hold paradox.
Right.
So it's not
states and stages, that model.
Yeah, I believe that's it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My mind's a little rusty there, but it's not necessarily easy for everybody to hold paradox, and I think that it's a great topic to talk about because it opens that possibility, for people who are interested in it, but also people who feel maybe that it's something foreign. Like, what does that even mean? Or how do you hold two things that are totally opposite at a given time? And so I'd like to talk about that in a minute. But I do feel that it's not necessarily a given that all human beings are sort of put together to hold paradox until they are. But I think that's a great segue into what is it that does hold paradox easily? What is it in our nature that does that? And I love to use this exercise, which I use quite often, which is if you take two opposites, it could be, let's say, in spiritual circles that are circling near the Advaita teachings, it could be a person who asserts, I'm nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to tell people, why don't you just hold that in one of your palms out in front of you, just the notion, like I'm nothing. And as though it's just like a placeholder for that part of yourself that senses like, oh, I'm nothing, or I don't exist, or I don't exist as a separate I. And so you can hold that in one hand, and then in the other hand, with your other palm up, you hold the notion like I'm someone, I'm something. And I think there are many people that have bumped into states or perspectives or feeling that they are nothing, or feeling that they are something, or that they are no one, or they are someone. And sometimes that can be a difficult flavor. Like, wow, no one sees me, or no one's, acknowledging me, and I feel like I'm no one, and that can be a sense of no one that's founded in a sense of lack, or like a missing experience, And then there's also a sense of no one that people bump into when they look for a fundamental sense of I. Who am I? Who is it that's having this feeling? Who is it that's living this life? And they look deeply into that question, and they can't really find a specific something that they can pull out of the air and say, this is exactly what I am. That's, confined to this one notion, or one location, or one memory, or entity. And so the more people look into that question, they may feel like, wow, there's all these thoughts and feelings and physical experiences, sensations, but there isn't a particular someone that they're occurring to that's distinct and apart, that we can single out as a fundamental I, or me ego structure, sometimes used. And so when people really get that, there's this dawning of, oh my gosh, I spent this whole life, advocating for this sense of me that I can't even find. Mm-hmm. And it feels more true to say I'm nothing in particular, and so there is that experience, but also sometimes people really have the opposite feeling, like, hey, I'm here, pay attention. And, I have certain wants and desires, and, if you hit me, that hurts. And there is a someone here. And if you love me, that feels great. And so if a person spends time holding these opposites and even doing this exercise, holding them in their palms, and then they notice that what's observing each given conclusion about what's present, I'm someone or I'm no one, I'm something or I'm nothing, and you just really look at those and you get a sense that what's looking isn't taking sides. It's just simply seeing and looking and observing and bearing witness to both constellations that conclude someone or no one. But what's looking has this impartial, like unconditional witnessing that is really quite different. And would we say that holds paradox, that it witnesses paradox, that it expresses as paradox? These are all different perspectives that people can visit. Like, oh, this that's looking out my eyes is a consciousness that isn't conditioned, but look at how it can constellate around all these thoughts that create this conclusion. And wow, it's as though that very same consciousness can gather into a very concretized belief that lands in one palm or the other. And so I think that the nature of paradox is that it, I think it's inhabited more easily the less there is a really invested sense of separate self that has to organize around beliefs or conclusions that land on one side of duality or another. The more a person kind of sees through the habits to, vehemently hold on to this conclusion or that conclusion, the more a person eases out of those concretizations and has a more spacious sense of being and a more spacious consciousness, the more that very space of what you are just naturally sort of holds opposites, and the opposites just kind of find their dance with each other and or their integration or their distinctness in whatever ways sort of suit the moment, And sometimes it's more of an individuation of a very distinct personhood that comes forward, and that's our experience. And then when that's perhaps not as needed and we relax more into a more holistic, or I don't know if more holistic, but just more spacious sense of being, then maybe the experience feels more like we're nothing, than something. And I think that there's just a dance of what kind of takes the foreground and background and how those flow.
Yeah, I love that framing of the holding of paradox as a gateway to non-duality, to seeing that witness that you described that's beyond the two things that seem to be in paradox, and saying like, okay, well, what is it that notices that there's even a paradox present?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that can be the entry point. Mm-hmm. And then the more that's really inhabited, the more I feel like the attention that would be tracking those things kind of softens into a more general awareness. Like I think of attention as really focused awareness.
Yeah.
And when the attention has an opportunity to not have to have a vehement focus to pull at it, and it becomes more global. For example, this is another entry point, would just be like global listening or global sensing. Listening. That's why people love to go for walks or spend time in nature too. They just sort of naturally let their attention stretch out.
Right.
And I think that in that there's a way that that witness that feels like it's sort of at the helm of attention, that even that witness and that focused attention just sort of softens into a more general awareness where there's a greater connection with all of life, what I sometimes call the big body around our local body. And we do get a more of a sense of the moment arising as a whole. Like inside, it might be our own thoughts and emotions or sensations. Outside, it might be the birds or the winds or the car going by or the lawnmower or the neighbor. But it feels more like a whole orchestra of the moment that's bubbling up. And that just so naturally holds opposites and doesn't even really know the term paradox.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm feeling that the energy of attention still feels very localized and happening, directly to me. Whereas awareness, this more, you talked about open listening and an open field of awareness, it starts to become much more radically impersonal and much more open. And maybe that even can be a gateway into the collective consciousness that we're all sharing, is because there's no edge to that awareness. Our sensed, the awareness that we experience subjectively is only limited by our human senses, I guess. And there's a much greater interconnected field of awareness that's even beyond sensory perception. Yeah.
I hear what you're saying about that entry point into the shared, like a shared, what do we call it? Maybe field of awareness or something. I could say I was interested in what you said about it being limited by our senses, because that's certainly true. Like, let's say our awareness of sound only travels as far as our hearing.
Yeah.
But it could be that our systems sense things beyond that for sure. That's a whole other topic. But also I think that our senses maybe limit that. Our scope of awareness, but maybe they also just give awareness an instrument to know itself, that maybe it wouldn't be able to. And so therefore, not sure what the opposite of the word limit would be, but once again, we're talking about paradox, right?
Yeah.
Where it potentiates the ability for awareness to know itself. Or, earlier you used the word home, and, it gives an instrument, a homing instrument for awareness to function through senses,
Yeah. An experience is coming to mind about 15 years ago. So I lived in the city, and I would practice meditation in my apartment, and it was on the ground floor in Philadelphia. So there's a lot of traffic noises, and there was other tall buildings across the street. So the sound field where I was meditating was very dense and very closed, And then I went on a meditation retreat just in the suburbs of Philadelphia, in the countryside. And just the sound field while I was meditating just opened up so drastically. And I could hear birds that seemed like they were miles away. And there was it's just an expansiveness in my consciousness. And I said, oh, my consciousness is unbound. It's limitless,
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
And And you think about, we can hear it maybe like an airplane. Let's say that's the furthest thing we think we can hear.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if you remember this. A few years ago, they recorded the sound of two black holes colliding. There was like an instrument on Earth that caught the vibration of these two black holes that were whatever millions of light years away, and
Wow.
that just expands again what our consciousness can perceive.
Yes.
And all of that's here in this moment in our experience.
Yeah. I loved how when I studied acupuncture, they would talk about this sense of holographic being. And like, let's say, for example, you wanted to treat someone's neck pain or something, that you could find a spot for the neck in the map of the ear or in the map of the hand or in the map of the foot, or you could narrow it down, and maybe like in every fingernail you could find a map of the whole body, or who knows, like all the ways that it was very holographic, like to the tiniest point. And there's been acupuncturists throughout history that have maybe like treated every condition from one point in the body. Like they always use kidney 3 near the ankle, or which is like as you know well, Michael, the numbering system for a certain point in the body. But that there's this sense that the whole of it is present in any teeny part of it, and that it's infinitely divisible. And I love that story about the two black holes colliding, and in this like light years away, but how there's this here, that recognizes it right here in our tiny little Earth in the middle of the universe, or our tiny little instrument that's on the larger Earth. Yeah.
I love that you're bringing up the holographic nature of these practices, because it's actually come up on several other episodes. We were speaking with Kabir Helminski about Rumi, and he was talking about the language, the poetry of Rumi, how that was holographic, how in each word of Rumi's poems, it can open up into all these other poems that Rumi has written, which open up to all these, thoughts about God and the universe and creation and science. And
oh my goodness, how rich.
Yeah.
I remember one time when there were fires in California in the Sonoma County region, which is where I grew up. I was living maybe about 2.5 hour drive by car from there. But one night I was woken from sleep, and there was this really erratic, skittish energy going in my brain. And I remember kind of feeling like it was very flickery and chaotic. And I thought, I've never experienced this in my life, this particular brand of my mind moving. And I was just really compelled to just offer this energy that was so frantic, just this really still light of attention. And I was just like beaming stillness to this energy like all night long. It was hour after hour.
Wow.
And then the next morning I woke up and I found out about all these family members and schoolmates and people from my childhood community whose homes had burned, or who were running from fire, or who got burned themselves, or were fighting fires as firemen, and nursing and all kinds of things. And I thought, wow, isn't that amazing? Just that connection that we have in ways that just registers right here in our own states and our own bodies. And it was just a very, concrete, experience where I really, really got a sense of that.
Yeah. Well, I sense it's from your decades of practice too, that you were able to create the space to even notice this flickering, but then to connect that flickering sense to the environmental catastrophe that was unfolding.
Yeah, and I just was following my nature, which was, I was just drawn to like invite those frenetic patterns to be aware of the stillness that was present also, and just like help them be conscious that stillness is here, and that stillness is that I was just kind of instinctively offering that stillness to the chaos so that it might, feel that support, and but I had no idea why it was happening or what was going on in terms of the historic unfolding of events, but it was just like an instinct.
Yeah. Yeah, and something you said earlier in our conversation about the importance of the basics and the fundamentals of a meditation practice, and I guess you can think of it as like the meditation practice is developing an intimacy with stillness, so you can access it whenever you need it. So, like even in the chaos of
Yes.
massive forest fires. So that it's there, that flavor of stillness is still present in you, so you can access it when you need it.
Yeah. I do find that practice helps that access be much more available and at the ready, for sure. Yeah, and sometimes life puts us in situations where we can't call upon those qualities on demand. I think. But there's plenty of times where it just sort of pushes to the foreground. It can. Yeah. And I think that when there's practices where we've continually invited that stillness into the foreground of our experience and, kind of really given it residency in our being, then we have those kind of patterns of architecture in our being to really hold and express that.
You mentioned Adyashanti earlier, your husband, and he's a well-known teacher to the Sand community. And I'm just curious how you two have navigated kind of being public figures, but having this, like an intimate marriage relationship. Like, how do you find the boundaries between, maybe if there's like arguments or tension at home, how you don't throw, the absolute nature of reality in each other's faces if there's a disagreement, things like that.
Oh, there's some structures that we have in place that really help us. For example, very early on when Adya first began to teach, he made it really clear that he never wanted to have a set retreat center or meditation center or something like that he would prefer to, go where he was invited. And this was sort of before online was really a thing. And, almost 30 years ago. And so I felt like that was a real support to our autonomy as a couple, and, that we could go home to our own home that wouldn't be necessarily on a retreat site or at a center where people could knock on our door 24/7 or, so we could really step away from our roles in teaching or, being leaders of a community. And I'm forever grateful for that, because that's just really worked very, very well for us to have that distinction and to have that sanctuary of home that's like a place where we can be independent of those roles. So that's been super helpful. It's also incredibly helpful that he and I are just really hooked up for monogamy, like through and through. And so that's very helpful for how it works for us anyway. And let's see, we're also both, for the most part, I don't know if this is actually true what I'm about to say. When we first met, I would say that we were both very conflict averse. I think now we're much more comfortable with conflict. Not that we have much between the two of us, but I think that, I think sometimes we have to lean in to what we're have aversion for, and get to unpack it and get a little more familiar with those waters. And as we've hopefully matured and grown as people over the decades, I think that's easier. It's not necessarily our go-to conflict, but a little bit more at ease with it. But he and I, we're just a little bit, maybe different than other people, maybe not, I don't know, but we just don't have a ton of conflict. And we never have, even when we were dating or through our whole marriage. It just hasn't been a theme. To say we don't disagree sometimes, that's not to say we don't disagree sometimes, because we do, and we have very different hookups. He has an incredible gift for clarity and just seeing things in ways that sometimes I don't first pick up on. But I have a more, I would believe, this is my story about it anyway, is I may have a more adept sense of feeling and picking up on things in a more kinesthetic way, where I might just sense or intuit that there's something else we need to pay attention to, or I'm very relational and people oriented. So that's kind of more of where my development has been in life. And so sometimes I'll bring his attention to the needs of certain individuals, or, more of at the people level. He's very amazing at big picture, and I'm incredibly detailed. So it's a good complement. But it also makes for sometimes a need to, kind of find the meeting ground and, hashing things out a little bit more. And again, so we don't always agree, but there's so much fondness there, just deep, deep fondness and wish for the other's well-being and happiness, that it just seems to work for us, because he so wishes for my happiness and I so wish for his, that we kind of got each other covered. And that seems to be the way that things work. As far as your question about, like, do we, pull out the kind of absolute card, or we're just not really hooked up that way because of how our awakenings unfolded. They're very tied in with the heart, and especially the hara, because of Adya's training in Zen and his training of me. There's, such a way that our human consciousness really invited spirit into the core depths of being, like even in a physical, energetic sense, that, and there's such an emphasis on that strong foundation of posture and that rooted, grounded, still quality that is kind of the hallmark of Zen, and that cultivation of hara energy, and through the attunement of consciousness to that specific center, it's going to be different than, like, each awakening is different. If it's, let's say, a person's focus is on the spiritual eye, or somebody else's is on the heart, and somebody else's is on the hara. And each awakening is going to unfold a little bit differently. And so because our concentration is so heavily weighted in the hara, it doesn't tend to be as top-heavy as a realization that would be as prone to prefer transcendence or to prefer absolutist views. I feel it's a sort of bridging of that light of consciousness that shines through our eyes that we were talking about earlier, but it's bridging it into the body, into the very source of the breath, and into where the breath ultimately arises from, that sense of what in my circles or at Open Gate we call the ground of being. And so I think it just translates into a different type of awakening that isn't as prone to, pulling that absolute card as a kind of run around to avoid, the concrete experience of what's actually happening.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, no, I think people will appreciate hearing that. Maybe people who are also in a relationship with someone else who's on the spiritual path or in the path of awakening, to kind of help orient, to hear your story with Adya, which sounds really lovely. So thanks for sharing all that.
Sure. If they're interested in more of that topic, he and I did a number of years back create a product with Sounds True, who's a publisher, and you can find them online. And the product's called The One of Us. Okay. And Adya and I are really clear that it's not our role in life to, step forward as relationship teachers, and nor is it really our focus. But for that product, we were interviewed and we were encouraged to talk about, Dharmic relationship, you could say.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, we'll have a link to that in our show notes. I'll look that up and people can check that out. Nice. Well, this has been a very wide-reaching, both wide-reaching and deep conversation. So I'm really appreciative of your time and your attention and energy today, Mukti. So thanks so much. And you mentioned you have the Energetics of Awakening course, which is starting in June, you said?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's more information on our website. We actually have like a triple website. So there's the opengatesangha.org, but then it has a whole, like, you just click on the Adya site or the Mukti site, and it's literally like 3 sites linked.
Gotcha.
But all of them have the calendar in the program section. And when you just look at the calendar for June, you'll see the talk series, and can click on that for more information.
Great. Very nice.
Yeah. Well, also, Michael, I really appreciate all that you put into the questions. I was really relieved when your first question wasn't like, tell me about your awakening, because that's like the first question of almost every interview.
Right.
And I really love like diving, deeper into the pool. So thank you for all that you brought too in terms of questions and preparation.
Yeah. No, yeah, I find as a listener, I'm kind of always less interested in what happened before the awakening. I wanted to kind of know what's happening now, when you hear where are these people now.
I love that. Yeah.
And thank you for listening to The Sounds of Sand. We invite you to explore more of our talks, dialogues, videos, articles, events, and offerings through our website, scienceandnonduality.com. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please consider becoming a member to access our massive library of Sand content, available exclusively to Sand members. And we would love it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google, and Spotify. and share this episode with your family, friends, and all sentient beings. Be well.